Okay, well, today is a pause week. We said a little while ago at the end of a sermon series, we'd take some time to reflect, some time to pause, some time to essentially just think about what's God been saying to us over the past few weeks. So we've been doing this series called Foundations. You may have heard all the talks, some of the talks. You may have heard none of the talks. It doesn't matter. You can still pause today and you can take time to reflect because our lives are busy. We don't often come to stillness. We don't often carve out time to actually just stop and think about, where we are, what's going on in our lives, what's God saying to us. If we're on a journey, we may be somebody who hasn't got any faith. We may be somebody who's been walking with God for years, but we can still take time to pause and reflect. So I thought we'd just start with a little exercise before we start. Last year we did a series called Everyday Spirituality, and we looked at this idea of invocation where we kind of speak to ourselves and kind of draw ourselves to present. We sang a song this morning, haven't we? Come on, my soul, wake up, sing. And we can speak to ourselves in this beautiful position as human beings and being able to have a conversation with ourselves. And so in that series last year, we used a simple prayer, and it went something like this. It said, "Here we are, Lord. Here you are, Lord. Here we are together." Okay? Here we are, Lord. Here you are, Lord. Here we are together. So why don't you just close your eyes again, if you feel safe. You can do that. We just start by saying, "Here we are, Lord." And as we say that, we recognize ourselves being present in this room. Just feel that sense of being physically present in this space. Often our minds are always thinking about other things or other places, but just sense yourself physically being present here. Feel yourself in the chair. So here we are, Lord. And then we can say, "Here you are, Lord," because we recognize God joins us by his Spirit. He's with us here today. And it's that communion that is special. So here we are together. We're here with God together today in this space. And he's able to speak to us. He's able to refresh us. He's able to renew us. So here we are together. Okay, I'm going to stop you before you fall asleep. So here we are, we're present. We're present in this room. So we said the pause weeks, they give us a chance to do three key things. We get a chance to recap, so to go back quickly and summarise what we've been looking at over the past few weeks. We get a chance to reflect, and reflection is really important because that's where we think about what we've heard, what we've learned, what's sort of gone in and landed. And then we think about relate. How can we apply something to our lives? Perhaps something needs to change. Perhaps something needs to move or shift. Perhaps the way we think about something, the way we act, the way we relate to somebody else. Something may need to occur in our lives because of what God has been saying to us over the past few weeks through the content that we've looked at. There's no fresh content today. You're all content heavy. So I'm not going to give you any more content, but what we're going to recap over the stuff we've looked at over the past 6 weeks. And this has been an interesting series because we've been essentially looking at the foundations of the church. But also we all have foundations. We all have stuff in our foundations. We'll spend some time looking at that in a moment. But we're predominantly looking at the stuff in the DNA of this church that kind of makes us what we are, determines how we act and how we choose to do things, how we relate. So I'm going to quickly go over those things we looked at. So we looked at generosity. We looked at how the generosity of people over decades has enabled us to move from being a tent to being in this wonderful refurbished factory facility, and how decades of generous serving and giving and stewarding has basically enabled us to move from that humble tent into having a facility like we've got today. It can be a real blessing to our community. So generosity is in our foundations, growing from where we've come from to where we are. That was in our first week. In our second week, we looked at our understanding of God, and we said primarily our understanding of God is that God is a God of love. God is a God of love. And that determines, again, why we do certain things, why we lean into certain things. We try and demonstrate his love through everything we do. We're not trying to convert people or win people over to an ideology or a religion. We're trying to show people God's love and demonstrate his love in as many ways as we can. So in the way we relate, the way we do compassion ministries, the way we use our building, all this is communicating the love of God. And also it's demonstrated in the way we treat each other. Jesus said people will know that I'm real when they look at you. Because when they look at you and see the way you treat each other in love, that will be a demonstration of what's inside. The fact you've met the living God and his love is in you and being displayed. So the way we treat each other is one of the best ways we can communicate God's love. On the third week, we talked about how Jesus informs our leadership, and we said that we try and adopt Christ-like leadership in the way we organise ourselves as a church. We said that Jesus is the sort of paragon, the ultimate example of servant leadership, the way he lived, the way he led, the way he ministered. And we look at him and we see the best example of how to do organisation well, how to carry responsibility well. And so we try and adopt Christ-like leadership throughout our church. And we talked about our willingness to be flexible, to grow, to be family, to be authentic, to treat everyone with equal value. We talked about equipping each other to minister and how all those are informed by the person of Jesus Christ. On the fourth talk, we talked about space to serve and how we've designed a building to reflect our values. We have this wonderful, welcoming cafe space when you first walk in to the building to reflect the heart of God, to welcome and draw people together. The way we use our other spaces to be flexible for ministry and to serve our community and engage with the needs of our community. We've got this incredible space that we now steward to try and demonstrate God's love in various ways. On week 5, we talked about doing things well. This is our passion, to try and do things well, and how we talked about how we're these living stones that God uses to build his church with. We're the main fabric of the church, not the bricks and mortar of the building. And we talked about how we use our time and our energy and our money, how we steward our resources to try and do things that demonstrate the heart of God. And we talked about our heart and our treasure, and where our treasure is, our heart tends to follow. And so we talked about financial giving that day as well. And last week, Jake looked at this idea of geography, where how we're placed by God in a location. I think God's really interested in places and where people are. And we really are linked to the land, I think, in many ways. And so the fact here we are on the coastlands, in this particular part of the UK, is no accident. We're here placed by God to communicate God's love into the area. Some of you have grown up here. Some of you were kind of sent here. But we're all here now together in this space, at this time, in this geography, to communicate the love of God. And you'll notice there's lots of new housing estates being built up around here. You may have different views on them, depending on whether you like things to stay as they are, or whether you like to see change. But the reality is people are coming to this area. More and more different people are coming to this area. And we're here ready to show God's love to those people as they come in. We're here to welcome them and to demonstrate God's heart for them. So our unique location is really important to God. And where you live and where you kind of connect and where maybe you work, all these things are really, really important to God. So never take for granted the fact that you are in a certain space at a certain time, because you have an opportunity in that space to communicate God's love in a unique way. And we said that Riverside does have a unique part to play in communicating God's love into these coastlands. We're not the whole picture, we're just part of the picture. We've just got part to play in bringing God's love to the coastlands. So that's a quick recap of the past 6 weeks. If you missed any of the talks, you can catch up on YouTube, and I do recommend you go back and catch up if you've missed any, because it's been a great series. So let's have a think about this first aspect then of reflecting, thinking about some of the things that have impacted you over the past few weeks. Some possible questions you could be thinking about. What did you sense God say to you or has been saying to you during this series? What has particularly maybe stood out to you? What have been any important takeaways for you from this series? You know, what has stayed with you when you've left the building, when the Sunday's over? What's stayed with you from this series? Or you could think about what's resonated with you, for good or for bad. Sometimes someone says something and it creates a reaction in you or resonance in you, that it might have provoked something in you as you've heard this series. And the great question is, what might need to change? What might need to change because of what you've heard over the past few weeks? What might need to shift in your life? So we're going to have a bit of time to think about that, okay? So we're going to put some background music on, and we're going to spend a few minutes to think about these questions. Now, if you're an extrovert, you might want to turn to the person next to you and share. If you're an introvert, you might want to sit there and just head down, eyes closed, and just don't talk to me. I'm processing. There's a whole range of people in the room, so don't feel pressured to do anything, to say anything. Just do what you feel comfortable with. But we're going to spend a few moments just reflecting on these questions. You might have your own questions as well. You might have your own things going on. You may have heard nothing of these series. It might be your first time in church today. You can think and reflect on the things that are important to you during this time. Okay, so it might be helpful to jot some things down, you know, to record maybe some answers to these questions that you've got, so I capture them. Now, I'm going to ask a question. Anyone brave enough to come and maybe share something that God has spoke to them about during this series? I haven't given you any notice, so you don't have to, but anyone got anything they might want to share that might encourage other people?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I've got no idea what I'm going to say. I just felt an urge to get up and stand in front of you with a microphone. So, hi, how are you? From my point of view, this week this season of Foundations has been quite poignant for me. And Kate and I were just talking about it then, actually. A few things stuck out to me about generosity, space to serve, Christ-like leadership, God is love, obviously. But one of the things that hit me just now, actually, today, is when Simon said about all these new people coming into Whitstable. And I was one of those people who was sat there thinking, actually, do I want loads of new houses being built? You know, there's loads of signs up around Whitstable saying, you know, we don't want all these new houses, we don't want all these new cars, we haven't got enough infrastructure and everything else. But then, sitting there this morning, I just felt God say to me, you know, we're here as a church, as a building, we're here to support all these new people coming in. It's a great way of getting new people into church, to know God, to know Jesus, to know the love of Jesus. And it ties in also with something we did in our small group this week, where we sat down and we wrote out a load, on a list of paper, we wrote out what we felt we wanted these coastlands to be like, and we... Dave came down, didn't he, from Brighton the other week, and it's something they did in their church. So it's something we did in a small group, and it's just sort of tied into me, really, from Simon saying today about, you know, all these new houses being built. And I think actually it's an opportunity for us as a church. You know, we've got a great foundation here, and I think we should be welcoming people into Whitstable and loving them, you know, and really showing God's love to them over the next, you know, 10, 15 years, however long. Anyway, I had a sense to get up and say that, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave. Anybody else? Come on, Kim. That was a very slow hand raise, that wasn't it?
I've obviously worked for the church for a long time, like 12, 13 years. The last 12 or 13 years, I have seen so much generosity in this church, so much love and kindness. And when I looked, we talked about that, generosity, and you have love and generosity in abundance. But what did make me laugh, because I'm coming up to a decision time in my life, and Jake said last week about the fact that he'd suddenly realised food didn't taste so good anymore, because they'd had to give up salt. But once he realised that it was for the love of Otterley that he had to give up this salt, everything was fine. Okay, so still looking at getting the salt back later on, but you have to change and I think that's really what's hit me. You need to acknowledge the times when you need to change. God doesn't want us to sit there and go, well, actually, I'm quite happy with the way things are. We need to invite more people, all kinds of people. We need to make the right decisions at the right time. And it's just got me thinking.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Thank you. Squeeze one more in. I think there might be one more out there.
Hi, everybody. I'm in one of those new builds. Sorry.
Yes.
But I live in Faversham, so you're all right. But it's interesting. The thing that's resonated with me is, you get a new house and you think, oh, it's lovely and everything's going to be beautiful. And it's a lovely area and surrounded by country park and lakes. And then I realise, actually, there are a lot of people who've moved in who are not so lovely. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of antisocial behaviour just recently, opposite me. So I've had a lot of thinking about that and about where you're placed and everything else. And it's really made me think about community. We are having a new community place built there. And I've tried to make some roads into it with the kids because I've only had one or two throwing stones and things like that and getting too close to my window on their bike. But instead of being like the normal response might be, report them, call the police, because there's been a lot of police as well, I've gone out and I've spoken to them and I've said, come on now, what are you doing that for? Don't throw stones at the window. And they're like, oh, sorry. Oh, we're just playing. I said, well, okay, just play, enjoy it. And then I go back in and I think, oh, please stop throwing stones. Anyway, they do. So, and I just want to try and connect more with some of the neighbours. They are council, so it's a real mix of council, private and shared ownership. And I really feel the need to reach out in that community and be Jesus for them, show them love. And that because they get so much criticism. And all over the WhatsApp group, it's, oh, come on, report them, they'll get evicted, they're on probation. I'm like, oh, God, you don't know what these kids are dealing with.
Yeah.
You don't know what home lives they've got and everything else. So I just feel a real heart for that.
Thank you. Let's talk about the relate aspect of this. There's a great phrase that we can think about. It's what, so what, now what. So when we're exposed to new content or something new, a new situation, it's the what. The so what is the how did that impact me? How did that resonate with me? But the crucial thing is the now what. What are we going to do with what's impacted us? What needs to happen next? So we've learned something's shifted. How are we going to apply that into our lives? And this is always the bit that falls, that drops between the cracks, particularly in our busy lives. I hear people listening to podcast after podcast after podcast, or self-help after self-help after self-help. But it's always in the application. It's always in the now what that we struggle, because we're used to content consumption, but we're not so used to application. Now what needs to happen? And so we can find ourselves going around the same things over and over again and not seeing any change in our lives. But actually, as these guys have said today, spiritual life is dynamic. We're moving forward. We're journeying. And so we should expect to be facing things that need a response, that we need to change and shift and to move with. And this whole church has been an example of a community that's grown and shifted over the ages. I said earlier on that this series has been called Foundations, and we've all got foundations. The building foundations, you can't see them under here. This building has got strong foundation because it was a factory, so it's got very strong foundation, able to support lots of heavy machinery. Used to sit in these spaces. But you can't see those foundations, they're covered over. And similarly, we've got foundations in our own lives that are unseen. We've got things beneath the ground level of our own lives that sit in our own foundations. And foundations are important because they determine what can be built above the ground, and also they determine the integrity of the structure that goes above the ground as well. So if you're going to build an extension to your house or whatever else, the first thing that happens is they come and they put down foundations. And the bigger the building above the ground, the deeper the foundations, bigger the foundations need to be. So some of these huge skyscrapers that we now have on the planet, their foundations are huge to support the weight and size of the building above the ground. But they're unseen. But what is seen is our actions. Our actions sit above the ground. So we can all see how the way we act, the choices we make, the way we choose to do things, not to do things. Our actions are the seen part of our lives. But our actions always flow out of our foundations. So you've got foundational beliefs, you've got foundational mindsets, you've got things that you believe are true, or things that you believe are valuable, and those are your foundations. And your actions, the way you live your life above the ground, if you like, what's visible to other people, is flowing out of your foundations. And that's always true. Your actions always flow out of your foundational beliefs. So if you ever want to try and figure out what your foundational beliefs are, just look at your actions, because your actions will tell you what's in your foundations. That's why Jesus said, he says you can know a tree by its fruit. So he said, if you want to figure out what kind of tree it is, and you don't know what kind of tree it is, well, simply look at the fruit. The fruit will tell you. An apple tree will bear apples, a pear tree will bear pears, a fig tree will bear figs. If you're not sure what the tree is, look at the fruit. And it's the same with our own lives. Our actions are the fruit of our foundations. So if we ever want to figure out what's in those unseen parts of us, we can just look at our actions. And it's quite interesting sometimes to keep a diary or to keep a journal and reflect on, what do we tend to do? How do we tend to act? What do we tend to think? How do we tend to behave? Because all that's coming out of our foundations. So, as we come back to what now what, as you've been reflecting over the past few weeks, or maybe just today in the room, you might become aware of something in your foundations, something that's resonated in you. Maybe you've thought about something, an area you'd like to get better at. Maybe you've thought about an area of your life you're not proud of. Maybe you've thought about something you want to shift or you want to see change. That change starts in our foundational beliefs. We don't just bring about change by trying to modify our behaviours. We have to go into those foundational beliefs and figure out what is driving that particular action, what's driving that particular behaviour. What's in my foundations that causes me to do that, to think that, to behave in that way. And so you might have had something that's come up as we've been thinking today. You might have been thinking about, as Dave said, you might be thinking about generosity. You might be thinking about, how does God's love impact me? How does it impact the other people around me? You might have thought about, how is Jesus leading my life? And how am I using my influence to influence others positively? You might have thought about, how can my space that I have be used to show hospitality? You might have thought about, how am I stewarding my time, energy and money to honour God? You might have thought about any of these areas or some other ones where you think there needs to be a change, there needs to be a shift. So here's some steps that might help you think about that. Think about where you are now and think about where you'd like to be. So where are you now and where would you like to be? And what would the steps be that help you get there? What would help you move from where you are now to where you'd like to be? Because we don't just arrive somewhere by accident. We don't just get there by magic. We take steps to get to where we want to be. The third thing that's really important is frame the goal as positive. So what will be good about getting to that new place? What will be good about making this change? Because if we don't think it's worthwhile making the change, we won't make the change. So what will be good about making that particular change? What will be the benefit for you? And linked to that, what might be some of the barriers that are preventing that change that you want to bring about? And how might you overcome them? And lastly, most importantly, who could help you make this change? So that could be obviously God, that could be friends, that could be some other mechanism or tool that's going to help you move from where you are now to where you want to be. Okay, so we'll have a couple of minutes on that one to turn and reflect and think about that, and we'll come back in a moment, okay? Okay, so we're going to take communion in a moment, so I'd like to invite the band to come back on the stage. That'd be great, thank you. Again, communion is a great time to pause and reflect and to think about where Jesus is active in your life, what's he saying to you, what's he encouraging you into, what's he encouraging you away from. There might be things in your life that he wants to draw you away from and draw you into. He said he comes to give us life to the full. He wants us to experience fullness of life. There might be areas of your life that aren't feeling full, and the Lord wants to come and meet you in those places. So we're going to take communion, opportunity to take these simple elements of the bread and the juice that Jesus used to symbolize his intimate relationship with us. It's no accident that he used food. And food goes into us, doesn't it? We eat it, it goes into us, becomes part of us. And Jesus said, my relationship with you is as intimate as that. My body and my blood, this is symbolically me. And I'm choosing to give everything I have for you, to express my love for you. And so as we take communion, all we're doing is we're remembering that, and we're reminding ourselves of God's presence in our lives. And we're thanking God for that choice that he said, no greater love is he that lays down his life for his friends. You know, Jesus' love is expressed so powerfully. So if you're able, why don't you stand with me? And if the communion service can make their way to their stations, please. We've got gluten-free at every station as well. So the way we do communion here, we go to the table, we get a little cup, we get a piece of bread, we go back to our seats, and we'll have some time just to sit and reflect. If you're on a spiritual journey, you can take communion today. You can take that as a symbol of your being open-hearted towards God today. So don't worry about that. So let's just pray for a moment. Lord, we thank you, you're here by your Spirit. We can just sense you're here, stirring our hearts and encouraging us this morning. And God, we thank you for this time that we have, this precious time to come to stillness, God, in your presence, where you speak with us, God, and you encourage us, and you fill us again with your love. And so, Lord, as we take communion this morning, would you remind us of just how great is your love in our lives, how much you're for us, how much you want us to have life to the full. And we ask this in your precious name. Amen.